Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Flagstaff County podcast. I'm Cary, Castagna, Communications Coordinator for Flagstaff County. You're listening to the official podcast of Flagstaff County. If you're not already, be sure to keep up with Flagstaff County on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as the Flagstaff County website at flagstaff.ab.ca. All right, so I am joined today by retired Royal Canadian Air Force pilot Jim Gillespie. Welcome, Jim.
Good morning.
Now, Jim, before we get to a few stories from your Air Force career, I'd like to start with your formative years right here in the Flagstaff region. You were born and raised in Daysland. What can you tell us about growing up in Daysland?
Actually, people sometimes criticize, not just myself, but it's commonly mentioned that growing up in a small town, you're probably denied opportunity. In Daysland, I don't think so.
No.
I grew up there, took my schooling there, and did reasonably well, I guess. I qualified for whatever it was. My father had the Marshall Wells hardware store and the John Deere agency, so I had something to do all the time, putting machinery together and helping at the store. Unfortunately, we lost him when I was just 13 years old. He passed away suddenly, and it kind of left me at loose ends. My family, I had two brothers. They're both deceased now, and I have two sisters, so they're still living in the area. Not Daysland, one in BC and the other one up in Edmonton. So that's pretty much my life. What I did for spare activity in Daysland was I got interested in sports. Stature-wise, I was never going to be a basketball player. I was never going to be a wrestler. Everybody was bigger than I was, but I could skate like the wind and nobody could catch me. So I played hockey every opportunity, on the sloughs, on the roads at night, under a street light in the wintertime, and I played for the Daysland North Stars, which is Senior A hockey. I started playing with them when I was 14. And we played up and down the line. We played against Killam, Forestburg, Viking, Camrose, Wetaskiwin, that type of league. So I was interested in sports and hockey in the winter, baseball in the summer. And I just loved sports. After I was out of school for a couple of years, I did get a job offer from the gas fields in Viking. Mm-hmm. And they thought that they needed another worker there year-round. And if I brought my skates and my hockey stick with me, that they would hire me, which they did. And I was playing hockey in the winter, but working in the gas fields in the summer. And I was doing a very basic job. I had a pack I wore on my back with a rod, 4-foot rod, called a sniffer. And I would walk the pipeline, the gas pipelines. It's one of the oldest fields in Canada, and there's miles of pipeline. And I'm looking for a leak, a break in the line.
Oh, okay.
So the sniffer that I had would zero in on just a pinhole leak in a pipeline. Then I had to dig a hole 4 feet square around it, mark it with chalk, and phone in for the welder. So I would walk maybe 20 miles a day and digging holes. I had fairly strong arms and a pretty good slap shot for the season when hockey was played. And I was there for just about 3 years, and on a hot July day, I had found a leak in the pipeline. I dug a hole. It was the third one in the morning, and it was only 12 noon. And I was sweating, and I had blisters on my hands, and I was getting pretty tired. And all of a sudden, 4 airplanes went over me at about 500 feet. Scared the living daylights out of me. And I found out later they were 4 F-86 fighter jets flying out of Namao on a practice bombing run at Wainwright.
Oh,
and it
wow.
went directly over the gas fields. So I looked up and I said, it was 92 degrees. It was July the 3rd. And it was sunny and hot, and I was tired. And I said, I'll bet you those guys aren't sweating like I am. So I said, I wonder if I could do that.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 19.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the end of the workday, I went and talked to my boss in Viking there, and I said, I'd like Friday off. And I'm going to go join the Air Force. He was a World War II naval fellow, veteran, and he was proud of his military experience, and he should have been. And he says, you can have Friday off. Do you want Monday off too? And I said, no, I'll come back Monday. There's more work to do out in the field there.
Yeah.
So I went up to Edmonton all by myself, knowing absolutely nothing. The closest I'd been to an airplane at that time was 500 feet at 500 miles an hour. It's the closest I'd been to an airplane. Walked into the recruiting officer, and the big tough sergeant, he looked at me and he said, what do you want? I said, I want to join the Air Force. Well, he said, what do you want to be? I said, well, that took me by surprise. I thought you joined the Air Force and you do what you're told, and they'll put you into a job that you're suited for. So, of course, being very conscious of my situation, I said, who makes the most money? And he said, pilots. I said, I want to be a pilot. Well, I've never seen a guy slap his knee and laugh so hard in all my life.
Oh.
He said, well, he said, you finished grade 12? Yeah, I said, I did. Passed grade 12. I have my certificate. He said, do you wear glasses? No. Are you healthy? Yeah. What do you do for activity? I told him what I did. Well, he said, we'll put you through a couple of tests here and see if you got potential. So he said, there's 3 exams you have to write, and they're 2 hours each. It's 10:30 in the morning. I'm going to go for lunch here in a little while, but my secretary will be in the office. You can go in the back room. She can help you with whatever you need as far as pencils, erasers, and that sort of thing. And I'll be back after lunch, and I'll mark your exams, see if we can go any further with this. Yeah. So I think in his mind, he thought, well, we'll get rid of this guy today. It's a Friday, and we won't have to mess with him next week. So I sat down and wrote the exams. He comes back at 1:30, and I said, well, here are my exams. And he said, well, you still got an hour and a half. Do you want to go over them? You want to review them? No. I said, I either passed or failed. He said, you have to have 60% as a pass mark, to go any further. And he said, I'll go in the back room and mark them, which he did. He came out in about half an hour and looked a little bit perplexed. And he says, I've been doing this for 10 years. And he said, I've never seen it before. He said, you got 60% in each one.
Oh, wow.
I said, he either did me a favor or it was pure luck.
Just made it, eh?
Yeah. So then he said, all right, we'll go the next route then. And now we have to do a complete medical with eyes, ears, all the trimmings. And we set that up for the next week. I went back to Viking and told my boss I won't be needing my job back because now I'm going to go and join the Air Force. They've said I can go into training. They then told me that once we pass all the medicals, and I was in pretty good shape from playing hockey and playing baseball the year round.
I bet.
And what he said was, if you meet the medical standard, we'll give you a ticket to London, to Centralia, Ontario, where the basic selection is for aircrew. I said, that'll be fine. So we went through another process of examinations of medicals, and they had the system all set up there for, well, the military does. So I passed all that. He says, all right, here's a ticket to London, Ontario. You'll be met by a bus, and you leave next Thursday.
Huh.
I said, well, that's just fine.
Yeah.
So I went back to Camrose. I told my mother, I said, I got a ticket here to Australia. I said, I've joined the Air Force. She said, Australia? Which Air Force did you join? And I said, I don't know. I thought it was the Canadian Air Force. So anyway, I'd never heard of Centralia. And of course, I'd never been down east at that point in my life.
Yeah.
But from then on, scared the daylights out of me. We get down to Centralia, and there was 64 applicants on the intake I was on. 64 of us, and we became a course, and our course number was 5813. The 13th group of aircrew select us for 1958. So they divided us up, 2 to a room in the barracks, and then they briefed us on what we're going to do. The first 90 days, we're going to go to school from Monday to Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And we're going to do grade 13, or Ontario University entrance level academic work, and before we start anything else. And I thought, oh my goodness. So they named the subjects. And they said, when they come to calculus, I said, calculus? I never even heard of it. I said, Daysland High School didn't have calculus. Mm-hmm. So I said, I wonder what I'm going to do about that. And the roommate, who I had no input as to who I was going to be teamed up with, happened to be a high school teacher, and he taught calculus, if you can believe it.
Wow, that's great luck.
He taught me calculus, and I would sit up in the evening, and lights out at 10 o'clock in the barracks. I'd go down to the main washroom and sit in the toilet cubicle at the far end, lift my feet up, and I would study till 2 and 3 in the morning. And I passed calculus.
Oh, wow.
Never used it since, but at least I got through it. So the academics, I went through that and made it. Every time there was a challenge and a roadblock, I put a little extra effort into it. So now we were going to go down to the flight line and start flying the Chipmunk aircraft. That was at ab initio, they call it, training aircraft, to see if you can fly. Yep. Every Thursday afternoon was sports day, and they stressed, for some reason, I didn't know why, table tennis was one of the big games that we had to play. Table tennis.
Maybe for that hand-eye coordination.
That's exactly what they were doing.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what they were doing. I'm just trying to think of what the other ones were. There was three types of activities, sporting activities, that you had to do. Unfortunately, skating wasn't one of them.
No, no hockey.
But in any case, I did get through the hand-eye coordination. Then we were on the flight line for the next 6 weeks, learning how to fly. And from then on, for 39 years, I flew airplanes.
Oh, wow. So, and it was a 33-year military career, and then you were...
Yeah, and then I had a civilian flying job for about 7 years. I overlapped with the Air Force for about a year. And I flew for a doctor out of Edmonton. He had a 4-engine jet aircraft, 9 passengers, and he had 2 homes in Palm Springs. But he also had business interests throughout the States. So we would take him to meetings, and, it was just a wonderful job.
Wow.
And it was good flying, very interesting, and I met very interesting people.
It's a great way to finish off your career then, eh?
It sure was.
So I just want to get back to your military career. I've got to ask you, because I've heard about the story that you were shot down in Africa. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can. It's kind of a long story, but it was getting towards the end of my career.
Okay.
And I was at the age of 48 years old, and mandatory retirement for Air Force was 48 years for the rank I had. But what they do is over the 48 years, we're allowed 30 days pay for each year of service. And if you don't get your full 30 years, they carry it over.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came time, they sent me a letter and said, you'll be released on this date, but you have 186 days of leave coming, plus we tack 30 more days on the end. So I had over 200 days of paid leave. I could do whatever I want, but I was literally out of the Air Force. So I didn't really want to find a tough job anywhere, but after a couple of weeks, a fellow that I had never met before, but he was retired Air Force, phoned me one night. And he said, do you know how to fly the Hercules, C-130 Hercules? I said, yeah, I just finished 3 years of flying it. Have you got a civilian license? Yeah, I've got a civilian license. Do you want a job? Now we're talking. Mm-hmm. Okay, he said, if you come out to here's my address. I live north of Edmonton. Here's my address. You come out Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. I'll have breakfast for you, and I'll tell you what the job's about. I can't tell you over the phone. Fine, I said, I'll be there. So as it turned out, it was a private company that took a contract in Angola. Angola was at civil war for about 10 years at that time. And they're on the west coast of Africa. They had purchased an L-280-30. That's a double stretch Hercules. And they need to crew it. He said, I can't tell you much about the job till you get over there, but he said, you'll get lots of flying, and we fly 24/7. We don't even shut the engines down. We just keep them going. And we do the maintenance on the run. And he said, your day will be 10 hours on, 20 hours off. So you fly for the 10 hours, and then you get 20 hours. Of course, you sleep about 10 of that. And by the time you have something to eat and that sort of thing, well, the 10 hours goes pretty fast. And there's really no place to go. And if you get outside and too far away from the buildings, there's gunfire. It was an active little, I guess what we call them an election, African election.
Oh, okay.
And that's the guy with the most guns wins.
Oh.
Not like our elections.
Yeah.
But it was a war that had been going on for 10 years. It started out as a civil war. They had 870,000 personnel in uniform. It was jungle warfare. 50,000 Cuban commandos were sent over by Castro. 15,000 Russian personnel were in there. And the opposition was 67,000 rebels running through the bush, led by Jonas Savimbi, who was he was a Harvard graduate in the States, but it was his intention to take over the country and set it up as a democratic republic, but they never got that far. And there's 15,000 South Africans supporting him. President Reagan was a fellow who was supplying weapons and ammunition, but no personnel, no fighting personnel, to the Angolan government. The Bengali Railway, which is the only one in Angola, was totally destroyed. Every bridge in that country was blown. You couldn't drive. And if you did get through on a jungle trail, the rebels controlled the bush. I was there for 14 months, living in the jungle. And on 3 occasions, they tried to bring a a convoy supply through the bush to the northeast corner. And what they were doing was the largest diamond mine in Africa was located at a place called Andrada, which is 485 miles from the coast of Angola, Luanda, 485 miles. And they had no way of getting food back there. They didn't have any way of getting diesel fuel. And they had 500 D8 Caterpillars, 150 dump trucks, and 150 front-end loaders. What they would do is they would dam up the river for a space of about 2 kilometers, and then they would excavate and bring 2 meters of riverbed back to the processing plant in Andrada, and they'd run it through the system, and the diamonds were falling out of there like raindrops. The fellow who was in charge of that particular operation was a British gentleman, and he took me on a tour of how they do it. I didn't understand how they get the diamonds out. Why isn't it a rock, But they have special stuff where the diamonds will fall off this rubber belt, but the rocks will stick to it, and then they just separate them that way. But anyway, they were producing, prior to the shooting, 220,000 carats of diamonds a month.
Oh, wow.
During the war, the production dropped to 20,000. But we still had to, they didn't have any way of getting fuel back there. So that's why this company called International Aircraft Services, based in Shannon, Ireland, were looking for pilots, because on that big C-130, we could carry 5,000 gallons of diesel in a tank. And that airplane just kept running better than a pipeline. And we kept that diamond mine going. That way they would get hard currency to buy war supplies to keep the war going.
Okay.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do that. So the one morning, I was number 2 chief pilot for the operation, and we had a total of 7 crews that we ran on one airplane. I flew the Herc for the RCAF for 3 years, and the time is very positively controlled at the rate of, say, approximately 125 hours a month, so the aircraft would last 30 years. So all those airplanes are still going. It's been 60 years.
Wow.
So, but it's good management, good maintenance, and everything else. This one Herc that we had to bring the diesel fuel in, we kept it going around the clock, and you're working, flying 10 hours, 20 hours off, 10 hours on, 20 hours off. We just kept going. There's maintenance checks to do. We were averaging 550 hours a month on that one airplane,
Wow.
which Lockheed didn't believe. They sent 6 inspectors over to have a look at it to see what we were doing, like not doing all the checks or not keeping the aircraft up. But no, we followed every checklist and everything else, but we just never quit. We worked around the clock. My first couple of days on the job, of course, we fly night and day, and at night, tracer bullets are glowing. They glow red.
Okay.
So the normal procedure for, say, a 30 millimeter or 25 millimeter tracer bullet, you put a bank of 10 in, one of them will be a tracer. But on several nights, I would count 10 or 11 tracer bullets, which means there's 120 bullets out there, not 10. And but we had procedures to climb up in a certain area, and then at 20,000 feet plus, we could get over and get a load of fuel and bring it back in. And as long as we didn't get down too low, we were okay. But what happened was the Russians had just moved out of Afghanistan, and you could tell there was a change in the activity. They'd bring a new Russian general in to run the war from the Angolan side, the government side. So you had to be kind of careful, and then they brought some of their newfangled equipment in too, which was new to that area, and that is heat-seeking ground-fired, shoulder-fired rockets, and also radar-guided. The ones they prefer are the heat-seekers, because they look for the hottest engine, and they'll lock on, and they have a range of about 10 miles and up as high as 14,000 feet. We knew about that weapon from my time in the service. Of course, I did service in NATO service in Europe, fighters, and also in Canada on fighters. So we understood how all these rockets work, and we knew what the ranges were. So as long as we were above 14,000 feet, we were okay, we thought. So one morning it was foggy, real foggy. Yeah. And I got airborne at 6 o'clock, and we're climbing out, and as I climbed out, we were into the fog. The fog had rolled over the runway, and it formed along the river and rolled over and covered the aerodrome. But we had about 200 feet before we were into the cloud. So I took off, and I said, wow, that's pretty good. And on departure, it was a great thing, because a heat seeker, if you fire through cloud or through fog, that attenuates the heat source, and they're not as likely to lock on. So if they're fired, we don't know if they're fired, there's no warning. But if they're fired, it's a little bit safer. So I thought, gee, this is okay, It's 6th of February, 1986, 6 o'clock in the morning. So we're into cloud at 200 feet, topped at about 5,000 feet, which isn't too bad, because as the heat builds in the day, it'll burn off, it clears up. And we're climbing through 10,000 feet when there was a kaboom. A missile had come up from about 3 miles away from the runway and went up number 4 engine, and the engine just disintegrated. It just blew. There's a turbine wheel at the back of those engines that turns at a rotation speed of 13,000 RPM. When that destructed, there was shrapnel, maybe the size of your finger, and that's just like bullets. And it would come right through the fuselage, the shrapnel. But nobody got hit. Didn't cut any hydraulic lines, and no electric wiring were cut.
Wow, that's
But
lucky.
I had a loadmaster in the back who was in charge of looking after the big tank that we had there. And he was standing up, doing his checks, and he heard zing, zing. And he looked around, and there was a hole on the right side of his neck and on the left side of his neck, big enough to put your finger through. And the piece of shrapnel went right through the airplane and out the other side.
Huh.
Could have taken his head off. Nobody was hurt. So I figured, well, once we figured out what it was, I thought it was just an engine fire. We have 2 sets of fire extinguishers on the airplane, but we have 4 engines. Figure that out. I never could figure that out. In any case, I used both fire depressants into that one engine because the fire was getting worse. And I thought I can probably make it to Lawanda, where we have our main maintenance hangar, where we can strip it down and replace the engine. Yeah. I didn't know how much the damage was, how bad it was. And I thought, well, fire didn't go out, so I thought the next procedure, I'll dive the aircraft, increase the airspeed, and blow the fire out. Well, that made the fire worse, because the whole underside of the wing was cut with the shrapnel that came out of that turbine wheel, and it was on fire. So we were pulling about 200 feet of flame. So I said, I better get back to the runway. I hope that fog is cleared up. It didn't clear up. It was thicker. And instead of going into it at, say, 5,000 feet, at 8,000 feet we were in it. So that means it's much thicker than it was on takeoff just 5 minutes before. And there's no procedure, no instrument flight procedure to get us down there. We were doing this all visual. So I had done 2 tours instructing pilots in the RCAF. And I developed a procedure that I told them, if you're ever trapped above cloud and there is no approach procedure, here's what you do. So you go over a known point, and usually there's a radio beacon within a mile of the runway. So I headed for this radio beacon that we had never used at all for a whole year in Angola. And I knew where it was placed in relation to the runway. And then I used the procedure that I developed, which is you go over the beacon on the reciprocal heading of the runway, turn 30 degrees, start a rate 1 descending turn, and then go down to minimums and roll it on runway heading. And that'll put the runway somewhere between your 11 and 1 o'clock. It's there somewhere. So that's what I did. And we had the fellow in the tower. He was there for wind advice and giving us the altimeter setting and pressure, but he was not a controller. But he was giving us the information that we needed. And I said to him, turn the runway lights up as bright as you can make them. See if we can see. We couldn't see a thing. So we descended down. I didn't want to get below 100 feet because the trees over there are 120 feet tall. So in any case, we leveled off at 100 feet. We had a radar altimeter, and I stayed at 100 feet. And my engineer said, I think I saw a light over on the left side here. So I said, well, I didn't see it. You tell me. So I turned towards that light. By this time, when we went into cloud, the wing was burning so fiercely that it just lit up the whole right side of the airplane. It was semi-dark in the cloud. So I found that light, and I had to do a 90-degree right turn into a dead engine, which is, you don't do that because your two engines on the good side that you're turning away from those engines, if you add power, that'll cause you to continue right over.
Oh, okay.
So we had to fight it all the way. But I didn't get it leveled out, got it on the ground, and there's no firefighting equipment there and no medical, but nobody was hurt medical-wise. We were okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we come to a screaming halt on the runway, and the wing was scraping on the runway. You said you read my book? There's a picture in there.
Oh, okay.
Of that airplane.
Wow.
With the wing on the runway. And the flames from the fire from that engine were taller than the tail. The tail's 36 feet above ground. So, excuse me, so it was burning fiercely. And we had called in earlier, and I said, you know, they've got these D8 Caterpillars, and they've got the front end loaders and trucks. They got a machine shop within half a mile of the runway. The company does. So I said to the fellow in the tower, phone over, and if they've got any firefighting equipment at that machine shop, bring it to the runway as quickly as you can. So we were standing out, couldn't do anything because of the flames. And I looked around, and here comes two guys running down the runway, pulling a steel-wheeled cart. It was about a 1915 vintage fire cart. And they're pulling it down the runway, and they got to within about maybe 100 yards. They wouldn't go any closer to the airplane. So I took a look at it, and I said to them, you know, they don't speak English. So I pointed to the fire, I pointed to them, and they just shrugged. They didn't know how to operate it.
Huh.
I took a look at it, and when I was going to high school in Daysland, I was a volunteer member of the Daysland Fire Brigade.
Oh, okay.
And it was the same equipment that we trained on in Daysland. I said, I wonder if it is the same exactly. So it was a chemical tank. So I pulled the pin and I rotated the tank, and whoosh, it pressured right up. So I pulled it a little closer to the airplane, and I crawled in on my hands and knees to the wheel well, and the wing was touching the ground, and the flames, as I said, were 50 feet high. And I put the hose on fan, and the pressure was building, 100-pound pressure. And I just started crawling on my hands and knees towards the wingtip, and the fire went out as I went, so I just kept going.
Wow.
And I kept going on my hands and knees till I bumped my head on the wing.
Huh.
And then the fire went out.
Jeez.
I said, wow. And then I looked at the hose, it ran dry within 5 seconds. So the fire went out. and I could hear the fuel. I had 8,000 pounds of jet fuel in that wing, and it was boiling. And the people that were in the village, they wouldn't come any closer than 200 yards. Nobody gave me a hand or a helping hand or anything.
It sounds like you were,
That was
you know,
lucky.
you had some good luck,
Pure
but
luck.
you were also very resourceful.
It just to think back on that and recognize that ancient piece of equipment. Of course, we were in a bit of a problem. Otherwise, we'd have lost the whole airplane.
Now, it sounds like you stayed pretty calm too. You kept your wits about you during the whole ordeal.
For some reason, I wasn't nervous at all.
You just did what had to be done, right?
It had to be done, or you either do it or die.
Yeah.
And the next day, I started to think about it, and that's when I, got a little shaky. And there were 3 African villages around the runway. It wasn't really a runway, it was a strip of asphalt 75 feet wide and 6,000 feet long, carved out of the bush, and that's what we were landing on. And the wingspan of the C-130 is 132 feet. So every landing, the wings overlapped the runway, So we didn't have very much room to maneuver.
Huh.
It was a very tight operation.
Now, other than Africa, you also had tours of duty in Germany, France, and the United States. Tell us about, I guess there was a couple times also that you went down.
When I first arrived over in Germany, in Canada, we don't have an air-to-air range. I was flying the F-86, the best fighter in the world at that time. We have 6 machine guns. But in Canada, we don't have any air-to-air ranges where we can fire on a target at 20,000 feet. There's no place we can really do it because other aircraft are flying through and various other things. It's not that the population is so great. It's just that the airspace was not certified for that. So in Chatham at the OTU, they said, don't worry about that. You'll get that training over in Europe. And we had 12 fighter squadrons over there on 4 bases. And we worked with the Italian Air Force in Sardinia. It's the Royal Italian Air Force, Decimomano was the name of the place. And they had an air-to-air range. So we'd go down for 3 weeks at a stretch twice a year to make sure that we could hit something if we were shooting at it. In case of war, it would be nice, if we could hit what we're shooting at. Mm-hmm. So we had to maintain a certain average percentage of hits to maintain combat ready status with NATO. So what we do is we tow a flag behind an F-86, and as you get airborne, the flag is 5 feet by 30 feet, and it's embedded with little strips of tin foil to give a good radar return, because our gun sight was radar ranging. It would give you the distance away from the target. And we had to do that twice a year, and somebody had to fly the tow ship. Occasionally it would come down with, say, a bullet through the tail of the tow ship for either a ricochet or whatever, but the flag was 1,200 feet behind the aircraft towing it. And we did our firing at 20,000 feet. And we were testing our equipment, make sure that, A, the guns worked at, we'd fly it at 40,000 feet, freeze them good for half an hour, come down to 20,000 feet and see if they'd work. And they work fine. And then they have to be all harmonized, so all 6 are going to hit a bullseye, a 2-foot bullseye at 1,000 feet. So we would do that, but somebody has to fly the tow ship and tow the flag, which is our target. So I'd volunteer for that as much as I could, because I was building my time. I just arrived on squadron, and I hadn't been there very long. Mm-hmm. And I was building my flying time up in my experience on the airplane. the procedure on takeoff when you're towing the flag is a little different than just a normal takeoff, because what you want to do is hold it on the runway for 165 knots and then pull it off very steeply, and then the flag comes off the ground. With a weight, it stands up, and away you go. So I was towing the flag one day, and I just pulled up very, very steeply, and I was maybe at 25, maybe 40 feet, and the aircraft exploded.
No way.
Everything just went boom. And I didn't even have the gear up. I reached for the gear handle, and just when I barely touched it, and that's when the engine blew. So it exploded and smacked back down on the runway. I didn't have a chance to bail out or anything. And it came into a smoking halt. And of course, the fireball, the fellow in the tower, they have a full military tower there with all the controls. And we were talking to him, a couple of weeks later, and he was saying, the funniest thing I ever saw in my life, he said, I've been controlling airplanes for 20 years down here. And he said, there's this little bow-legged guy jumped out of that airplane and ran to beat hell across the infield to get away from the explosion. And that was me. I said, yeah, I didn't want to stay there very long.
But you didn't have a scrape on you?
I'm sorry?
You didn't have a scrape on you?
No, didn't have a thing wrong. I twisted my leg when I jumped from the airplane. It's 12 feet in the air. But no, not a scratch.
Wow. You got lucky again.
I got lucky.
Huh.
Yeah. And then of course, everybody, this never happened before. They didn't know what it was. But just prior to my takeoff with the flag, there was a T-33, and we use those for communication traveling, but there were two fellas from Zweibrücken, my home base in Germany, were down there, and they were just taking off to go back home. So what they asked the controller, they said, hey, we'll just orbit at 5,000 feet and wait till Jim gets airborne, and then we'll go. We want to see him get airborne. Yeah. Well, from 5,000 feet, all they saw was a fireball. So they flew back to Germany. An hour and 45 minutes later, they're on the ground telling the guys in the squadron, Gillespie just got killed in Dutchy.
No way.
And they said nobody could have survived that fireball. It was a real explosion. So they said that I was killed. And my wife lived off base. And somehow, and I don't know how, she lived with a German family, but she got wind of that too. Somebody couldn't wait to tell her, But of course it was all wrong information. So within a couple of hours, the base commander of Sardinia phoned back to Zweibrücken to say, no, nobody was injured. So that worked out okay.
Wow.
But there's a lot of things that you don't realize. A career in the military, I was lucky, not in the sense of surviving, well, maybe that too, but
yeah.
There are a lot of other things that people don't realize. They don't provide housing for us. So you got to look after yourself. And when you got a little family, like a little 2-year-old, it's kind of tough.
Yeah.
My son was born in France. I got transferred from Germany to France for a second tour on the fighter. And my son was born in France. So then we come back to Canada. I went to Penhold, and I went to Gimli, and I went to Winnipeg, and I went to Ottawa, went to California, where my son now finished grade 12. He took grade 10, 11, and 12, 3 years in San Bernardino, California. And now my last posting was going to be in Edmonton. So I said, by golly, we'll get up there by the first week in August, and I'll register you at the university, because I wanted him to get an university education. Yeah. His marks were in the 90s. He's a very smart kid. So we get up there, and he and I went down to see the University of Alberta registration. And we had all of his marks, we had all of his papers, everything. So this fellow sitting across the desk, he looked at him and he said, yeah, he said, we can enroll him. We're going to enroll him as a foreign student. Oh, I said, why? Well, he said, born in France, educated in the United States. Well, what does he know about Canada?
Oh.
I never even thought of that.
Oh.
I said, well, what does he need to know? I mean, he's got all of the marks, he got the subjects. How is his French? I said, he's bilingual. Talk to him. They wouldn't do it. Who taught him the French? Some lady in San Bernardino. But she was born and raised in Montreal. She taught the French language at the university in Montreal, married an American serviceman and moved to San Bernardino. And she was teaching French down there. So they said, no, we can't do it. And the difference being, of course, is tuition.
Oh, okay.
You know, foreign students pay $30,000 a year to go to university. Canadians pay $5,000.
Oh.
So I said, I don't want him as a foreign student, you know. You'd
Yeah.
go on a four-year plan, paying that kind of tuition fee. Why, when he's Canadian? So in any case, we had a disagreement, but I said, you put on paper what you want him to be trained in to qualify for Canadian status. He said, English, French, and social studies. He says, he knows the history of the United States. Does he know the history of Canada? Well, I said, he's lived most of it. We've been to both ends of Canada with the Air Force. But to make a long story short, he had to go to night school for 90 days to take those subjects. He went for the first 2 or 3 in each subject, and he said, I've taken all that. So he showed up to write the exam at the end, and he passed with a 90% average.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So he'd had all that.
Huh.
That's just one of the things that people, I think, don't realize in the military. It's really not all that easy sometimes.
Yeah. Now, you talked about that one time you went down. Was there a second time?
Oh, yeah, another fighter?
Yeah, another fighter.
Yeah, there was. I was flying the Voodoo, CF-101. Yeah, it's an interceptor, and I was flying out of Chatham, New Brunswick. We worked with the other services, of course, and this was at a time when Canada had just purchased 4 brand new DDH, diesel destroyer helicopters. The DDH designation, they have a helicopter on the back, but they also have a defense system on the ship itself, both offense and defense. They can fire a 40 millimeter shell, they can fire missiles and that sort of thing. And they also have an enclosed, they call it an enclosed defense system, which really is a radar guided Gatling gun, which fires 3,000, 6,000 rounds a minute. And if they're in a war zone, they have sensors on board the ship that'll tell them somebody has locked onto you. In other words, you're feeding a radar signal back to a weapon. So you have to break that radar. And if you break it, then of course the missile will go off to one side. So we were acting as missiles, Voodoo. And we had electronic warfare aircraft come out of North Bay, and they would come in and they would lock on to the ship. And then we would, if they didn't break the lock on in 5 seconds, then they would launch us. And we had a Voodoo under each wing, and we were the missiles. So they said, we were coming in one night. It'd be good if we were 110 miles south of Halifax, and it was the 12th of December, and that water's pretty cold down there. And they couldn't break the lock. This one fella had a little trouble with it, so they had fire one. That's me, I'm number 1 missile. So I go down to 500 feet, get up to 520 mile an hour, and I go right at the ship. Well, they now have to get that Gatling gunner locked onto me
Yeah.
because their other defense system didn't work. So I'm going along, and I thought, well, they're not locking on because my Wizzo in the back seat, he's the gunner, he keeps breaking their lock. So anyway, as I went over the ship, I plugged in both burners. And there's a kaboom when you do that. And there's a shock wave that comes out of there. So after I passed the ship, the captain comes on, "Who did that?" I said, "Well, I got you." He said, "You knocked all the dishes off the wall of the destroyer. Don't do that again." So the next time I came around, I was going to do it again, and I plugged in the burners. And there's an engine door. It's a twin-engine aircraft, and the engine doors are 6 feet wide and 17 feet long. And at 520 knots, one of my engine doors opened up, and it just peeled like a banana. And immediately the fire warning lights come on, and all hell broke loose, basically. My navigator in the back seat, he's screaming, "I'm going to bail out, I'm going to bail out." I said, wait, I think we can handle this,
Yeah.
Don't jump till I tell you. So we did pull up. I shut the engine down, and there was no fire, but there was an overheat situation where the fire warning lights stayed on. So I rolled off at 34,000 feet, shut the engine down, trimmed it all up, and I said, "I think we can make it to Halifax," which was 110 miles. And I said, "Don't bail out." I said, "I can't swim 110 miles. So we did that, and as we got closer to Halifax, I called in and I said what the trouble was. And I said, "I want the fire trucks on the runway, and I want the ambulance there just in case." So the underside of the aircraft was virtually missing, and the flaps didn't work, but the gear did. So we got on the ground with no injuries,
Wow.
none. Very, very lucky again.
Sounds like a fascinating career for a, Daysland kid.
Well, yeah, I guess you'd have to say that. I've been to places that I never would have been. I've been to 75 countries in the world, all over the place. The only place I was not allowed to go was any Warsaw Pact country on the Russian side. But I did get to East Germany. I played hockey in Berlin for the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
And traveled through South America, North America, Asia, Europe, everywhere except Australia. I never got to Australia, but pretty much everywhere else.
Pretty well seen the world then, eh?
We did move around a fair bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, a fair bit.
So, Jim, is there anything else you want to tell us about? Just, looking back on your military career, and is there anything we still need to ask you?
Well, I don't know. I could perhaps talk for 6 or 7 hours on this, but if people that are listening want to take a look at the Canadian military as a career, I highly recommend it. Your training is superior. You're well respected for your NATO allies. You will learn trades and expertise. There's 104 trades that are available to you in the Air Force that are transferable to civilian life. And what you could do, I had no idea at the time, but you could do a short stint, like sign up for 5 years, and by that time you will be trades qualified. And if you're fortunate enough that your trade is transferable to civilian life, you can get out, go civilian, you can stay in, you can build your pension with the military, and you will get to travel and see the world. And right now, you listen to the news, and there's trouble spots all over the world. Mm-hmm. I think that the possibility of all of warfare right now is not very likely. There's a lot of blustering, and there's a lot of countries that are making noise. China's one of them, Afghanistan, we got out of Afghanistan, which was a good thing. I didn't like the way they gave it up to the Taliban, because a lot of people over there that helped us, translators and people like that, guides, wanted to get out and come to Canada. And they had 6 months warning to do it, and Canada did nothing until the last 3 weeks. It was just a terrible, terrible thing. But right now, the trouble spots in the world that we're involved with, our military has shrunk so much. When I got posted back to Canada from Europe in 1964, there were 28 flying Air Force bases that I could have been posted to. We're down to 8 now.
Oh, wow.
They just don't exist. We don't have the equipment. We need a new airplane. We need new ships. We need a lot of equipment. And this last leadership campaign that we just went through, the election, only one person mentioned defense spending. And he did it in one sentence, and that's all it was said. So it's not very high priority right now. There's too many other things. Of course, the pandemic is the big thing right now.
Yeah. But you must feel fortunate that you your career took place when it did.
I've said for a long time that I had the best time in the service, to be there, to go places. I volunteered for just about anything. I volunteered for Vietnam, volunteered for Malaysia. I volunteered for exchange duties. I flew 3 years for the U.S. Air Force as a Canadian. Traveled the world, and my lovely wife stayed with me. And I look back on it and I say, I wonder why.
Oh, yeah.
I think she hung around just to see what I was going to do next. But she is a wonderful person, and it is a family operation. I couldn't have done that without her.
Oh, yeah, to have that kind of support. Eh?
Yeah, it's just great. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all your time, Jim. I think that should do it. But yeah, we definitely appreciate you coming in and telling us a little bit about your career and your time in the Air Force.
Well, thank you. And like I say, they do teach you, and you're looked upon as a true professional when you come into civilian life from the military, because they know that your training that you received is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're 9 times out of 10 really good at your job, and they like that.
Yeah.
For people who are thinking of perhaps going into the military as a career or even as a stepping stone, education-wise, I don't know how I could express it any other way, but if you play sports, team sports, because doesn't matter how good you are, but you understand the team concept, and that's what the military is based on. I played for every base hockey team that I was ever stationed at. Even down in California, San Bernardino, these fellas down there had a little club, and they rented ice at a rink in Anaheim.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd go down there for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon and play shinny.
Huh.
Well, I'm sure some of those fellas learned their hockey from watching the movie Slapshot. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
Yeah, so it got a little rough.
It was a real farce. But this one guy, he couldn't turn, he couldn't stop, but could he hit? So it's a matter of trying not to get hurt.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Oh, what a good
but
time.
it was a really a good life that I've had, and if I was to go through it again, I wouldn't change a thing. I really wouldn't. I enjoyed it. As far as flying goes, I've flown 15 different types of airplanes, and I've got 13,500 hours of flying time. The average time for a 30-year career as far as flying goes, because they try to alternate a flying job 3 years with a ground job 3 years, and then back flying. And in my time, I skipped a couple of ground jobs, but managed to stay flying. And I would say a 30-year man today, if he got maybe 6,000 or 7,000 flight hours, he'd be lucky.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had 13,500.
You must miss it then. Eh?
Well, I sure did for a while. Yeah. I flew, when I came back from Africa, I flew for the reserves in Edmonton, 418 Squadron. I've flown on 6 different squadrons. And I also had a civilian job flying corporate. And I did that for just about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very interesting. You meet some pretty nice fellows. When I was with the Americans, I flew the T-39, which is it's a VIP transport, like our Challenger jet, but it's a Saberliner, they call it. And you meet all sorts of people. There were some humorous incidences too. The Americans like to work Monday to Friday. They like to have Saturday and Sunday off.
Mm.
Perfect for me because the flying is on Saturday and Sunday. So I would volunteer. And we'd be teamed up. There was a German exchange officer, a Canadian exchange officer, and an Australian down there. And I would volunteer for a trip on a Saturday, for example. So the German lieutenant colonel, his name was Horst Geda. And Horst and I became kind of buddies. We flew together quite a bit. And we had to fly in formal uniform, shirt, tie, buttons all shine, shoes shine. And we're flying VIPs around. So we had to pick this one fellow up. So I'll make it very short and quick. He was a 4-star general, but he was a non-flyer. He was a technical guy, and we had to fly him from Nellis Air Force Base over to Vandenberg Air Force Base on the West Coast. So we pull in there, and for a 4-star, you got to be there 2 hours before departure. So you got your airplane cleaned up, all the dirty dishes out, refueled, set up, red carpet. He comes along with 4 staff cars. Here comes the 4-star general. And we stand at the base of the steps going into the airplane. He said, "Who's the captain?" And of course, I'm wearing a green suit. Remember when Canada had green uniforms?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my golly. That was torture. Anyway, he says, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the aircraft captain, sir." I said, "Major Jim Gillespie, Royal Canadian Air Force." He said, "Who's that guy in the gray uniform?" I said, "That's Lieutenant Colonel Horst Geda, German Luftwaffe." He said, "Where's the American pilot?" Well, I said, "We don't have one." Well, he said, "I heard we're short of pilots in the USAF, but I didn't believe it." He turned around, went back to his staff car. He wasn't going to get on that airplane with 2 foreigners flying it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we thought we were going to take him to Cuba, Anyway, that was one instance. It was kind of funny.
So, and you've got a lot of great stories in your book, and we should mention your book is available at the Daysland Library, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah, I've had a lot of feedback on the book. I've been asked if I wanted to publish it, and I said, "Oh, golly, no. The way it's written is too much personal information, and I'd have to change the format." And the comments that I have received is that unless you're a pilot, I guess I talk Air Force a lot in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Use terms. So I'd have to put a glossary of terms in there, and a prologue and an epilogue, and to make it a public book that you could sell in Walmart or wherever. So I don't do that, but I give a copy to each member of my family, my brother's children and their grandchildren. And so I got 50 copies that have been distributed.
Well, that's a great legacy for the family.
Well, it is, and it gives them a good idea of what life was like the last half of the last century.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of feedback on that book, and I didn't realize, really, that, as it turned out, I wrote it 3 years ago. And it's probably one of the more sensible things that I've done.
Yeah, you said it started out as a letter.
Yeah, I was going to write a letter to my great-grandson, who isn't even born yet, just to tell him what it was like, because my grandson, he and I are the best of buddies.
Yeah.
And we virtually raised him because his mother was working, his father was working, and he spent a lot of time in our house. Yeah, and he was a terrific hockey player.
Huh.
He was being scouted for the NHL, and then he got hit at the age of 14 with a severe concussion.
Oh, gee.
Said no more contact sports for you. Yeah.
Wow.
So he's now fourth year university, and he's a self-taught computer whiz. When people have trouble with the computer, he can, for some reason, he understands the whole thing, and he can make it do anything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, it's been a great experience, a great life, and
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
my pleasure.
All right. Well, you take care. All the best.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.